Hello, I am Donald Leggett, and welcome to an extended Q&A interview with Eytan Uliel, CEO Challenger Energy, the AIM and OTC listed oil and gas producer and explorer. Challenger are best known these days for their Offshore Uruguay license, which they've been working on since 2020. They're proving up the potential for between 1 and 2 billion barrels of oil, which is a mighty amount of oil. Long-term holders may know them for the Perserverence well in the Bahamas, and depending on your timeline, before then they took over the Columbus assets in Trinidad and Suriname. And I'm familiar with those assets, so I'm the right man for the job, I think. Eytan joins me now for an extensive operational update in which he answers both my questions and yours. Greetings, Eytan. So how are you today?
Hi, I'm very well, thanks. It's nice to be here. I think this is my first time with you, so I'm looking forward to it.
It is indeed. And I'm going to ask you the question that no one else will ask you. I'm going to ask you about yourselves.
Okay.
So how long have you and Gagan Karuna, he's your partner in crime in Challenger. How have you been have you been at Challenger Energy? What encouraged you both to join? What was the attraction for you? Tell us all.
Well, I've been at Challenger Energy since 2014. I was brought in as the commercial guy to essentially raise the money to drill the Perseverance 1 well, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Prior to that, and the reason I had a reasonably successful career as an investment banker in resource and energy exclusively activities, that led to me going in-house and being a founding shareholder in a very successful early stage energy company in Australia and then in Asia. So I had some good successes, and that's what I've always been good at, is pulling together the funding and the strategy for taking these sorts of companies forward. I was attracted to this company in the first instance by the project in the Bahamas. I really, notwithstanding the outcome, it was a world-class opportunity. As I've told many people in many forums before, I invested a ton of my own money in it. So it wasn't a case of just coming along for a salary. I was in this for the big upside. Why I'm still here is I see the same potential in Uruguay. I'm very proud of the company that we have. It's a great platform to do things with in the future. As far as Gagan is concerned, Gagan worked with me for a long time in various other projects in Asia. And in 2020 or late 2019, when we started looking at the Columbus assets, and I realized that the company was going to grow and was going to have more than one activity, I needed some real skill and talent in terms of financial control, financial modeling, business development, etc. I've known Gagan for years. We've worked together. So I asked him to join at that time. So he's been with the company since 2020. And he's not here, but I would put words in his mouth and say that he's interested in exactly the same thing as I am. We both see the upside potential, and we're both very into the sort of things that this company does.
Okay. And so from the moment that you became CEO, can we ask you to mark your own scorecard and say how the business has performed since then? I think to go any further back than that is simply cruel and not fair.
Well,
but can we look forward?
Yeah, sure. Looking forward. Look, I became the CEO in May of 2021, in the aftermath, really, of the Perseverance well in the Bahamas. The company was in dire straits at the time. It had an unsuccessful well. It had a large amount of, unfunded liability, if you like, to the various contractors on that well. And it was not a happy time for the company. And in the middle of all of that, there was also COVID. And my first brief was to save the company. I mean, it was very, at the time, there was a real possibility that the whole thing would fold. So I'm particularly proud of the fact that I went to every single one of the creditors of the company, large firms, drilling contractors, service companies in the industry, and there were more than 60. given it was a big complex, well we had just drilled. And I sat down with all of them and I reached an agreement where they all agreed that they would take effectively 7 cents in the dollar as a settlement if we could raise more money. And it was that settlement coupled with what was a comprehensive restructuring that has enabled this company to survive and to continue. So one, I'm pretty proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that, after I took over, I told everyone we were going to slash the costs. Costs were running at a very high level, commensurate with what was going on at the time, but we've reduced the cost base of this company from $700,000 a month to about $160,000 a month at the moment. So that's, a pretty aggressive cost-saving campaign that I'm quite proud of. I'm proud of, the people in this company. We've had notwithstanding COVID, notwithstanding everything, we've had an exemplary HSE performance for the last several years. No incidents to note. I'm proud of the fact that all through COVID, we were able to look after all of our people, compassionately. We fulfilled all of our commitments. We've done a pretty good job for a small company. And then the final thing is I'm personally very proud of Uruguay. We spotted that opportunity in the middle of COVID when the whole world was in shutdown. I mean, I remember it crystal clear. Randy, our business development director who's looking after Uruguay, rang me on the 18th of April. And he said, if only we could get our stuff together, there's this amazing license and nobody's going to bid because everyone's in lockdown. And we had until the 30th of April to pull together a bid, which involved translating documents and certifying them, apostling them, and working out all the commercial stuff, delivering stuff by hand in Uruguay in the middle of a pandemic. And we made all of that happen. So everything that we have today came from some real, entrepreneurial grunt work that we did. And I'm pretty proud of that. That was not something too many other people saw or would have done.
That is a story. It is indeed a story. But today the focus is offshore Uruguay and the license which you hold there. You've told us the background story to that. But tell us the background to the license. What does that license area hold, and what has subsequently happened in that area since you were brave and bold enough to get off your asses during COVID?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we applied for the license in May of 2020. We were awarded it, and the world was in lockdown. And the award of the license was only formalized in August of 2022, 2 years later. We had seen the potential of that license, but it was early stage. It had a lot of similarities to things we were familiar with. It was big. It had the potential to be really material, not just to us, but on a global scale. It had a lot of running room. The water depths were not, unmanageable. But really what changed dramatically there, and, I can't take credit for this other than having been in the right place at the right time, was that in early 2022, Total Energies and Shell both drilled wildcat exploration wells offshore Namibia. And both of those resulted in discoveries. The Venus discovery for Total, the Graph for Shell. Venus is now referred to commonly as the largest ever ultra-deep water discovery, ever, anywhere in the world. So why is that relevant? In very simple terms, the basin in Uruguay is the geological mirror of where they made these discoveries in Namibia. Back when the Earth was one big continent, and then the South American plate pulled apart from the African plate about 125 million years ago, the narrow marine channel that formed between them was where all the source rock that produces the petroleum was deposited. And then it drifted apart, and some of it wound up in South America, in Uruguay and northern Argentina, and some of it wound up in Namibia and the northern parts of South Africa. And when those discoveries were made in Namibia, not only did it unleash the potential of Namibia, but you can correlate the source rocks over onto our side of the Atlantic. So all of a sudden, it's now massively de-risked. You now know that there are Aptian source rocks capable of producing petroleum right underneath our license and under, you know, the Uruguayan basin. And so that's a huge thing that happened. And it's not just me saying this. When it first happened, I started shouting from the rooftops and no one was listening. But in the last 12 months, there has been a stampede into Uruguay. So at the beginning of 2022, we were the only license holder there, a junior company on the AIM holding a license. 12 months later, every other license bar one has been taken out by Shell, by Apache, by YPF, the Argentinian national oil company. Just as telling is the people who applied and didn't win licenses. The Uruguayan government publishes who qualified to bid. And that's the who's who of the international oil business. Total, Oxy, Qatar, and everyone lined up for Uruguayan licenses. So it's not just me saying there's potential here. We now have all these major companies, and whereas we promised to do about $1 million worth of work in order to secure our license, the new license holders collectively have promised about $250 million worth of work. So they clearly see the potential in Uruguay in the same way that we do. And that's what's happened there, really. You know, we saw the opportunity early. We were the first ones in, so we got a great license on great terms. And then the discoveries in Namibia not only set off, you know, Namibia as being, you know, the hottest place now in the offshore, but also triggered massive renewed interest in Uruguay and northern Argentina. And our job now is to really capitalize on that.
Okay, let's talk about that capitalization. How do you exploit that fantastic license that you've got yourselves?
Well, the first thing, you have to do technical work. You have to add some value. You have to bring some intellectual property to bear. So when we saw what was going on in October last year, we said, right, even though our license allows us to spend 4 years doing this basic technical program, let's accelerate it. Let's get it done in the next 6 months. Let's also add a few extra things. So we licensed 2,000 kilometers of historic seismic, 2D seismic, and we had that reprocessed. You know, these are complex work streams, but essentially you're taking vintage seismic and you're running it through computers and machines and using modern technology to massively improve the image quality from that historic 2D seismic. We then were very pleased with the results of that. We then handed
yes. What did you find there? Was it interesting?
Well, what you do is it's basically you see a whole different picture. You're able to define faults and define structures in a way you never could. And the most important thing is you are then able to have that subjected to what's called AVO analysis, amplitude variation with offset, which is a technique pretty much standardly used by all the major companies to look at these sorts of deep water prospects. And, you know, long story short, you know, but ultimately when all the technical boffins have done their work, they either do or they don't find amplitude variation anomalies. Fortunately, in our case, they did. And they ascribe them a category ranking. It's the class 1. And we have class 2 and class 3 AVO anomalies identified on our block. That is just fabulous news for us. It's what you want to see. And with that,
how does it rank? Is one low or is one high?
It's not. It's different characteristics, but basically class 2 and
class 2 and simply different.
Yeah, class 2 and class 3 AVO anomalies are indicative of porous hydrocarbon-bearing sands. That's what you need to know. And we identified 2 of those on our license, in addition to a much shallower water prospect called Lenteo, which we knew about from before. We then were able to do a bit of corroborating work. So there was a seabed geochemical study that was done in the 2016 across Uruguay. We purchased that study. We reanalyzed the results of it applicable to our license. We had a satellite seep study done. It's really cool stuff where there's this firm in France. They take satellite images from the last 3 decades. They screen out things that are not valid seeps, and they're actually able to map where there are recurring oil seeps, and then you put all of that together, and what it identified is 3 potential prospects so far. We're still doing work, but 3 potential prospects on our acreage. You can map them, you can get an idea of the size, you can get an idea of the volumes, and then they're corroborated by the seeps and the geochemistry, and they're AVO supported. So that's as good as we could have hoped for. Really, we were very, very pleased with the outcome of our technical work. That shows a prospect inventory, as you mentioned in the introduction, of between 1 to 2 billion barrels of oil. That makes this material. It makes this the sort of thing that will catch the attention not just of us, of hopefully shareholders, but of super majors. And that's the next step here. The next step here is we now need to bring in a partner, so a farm out, and that is so we can go forward with a 3D acquisition. That's the next major technical step, and ultimately all of this leads one day to drilling of a well.
Okay, so you're looking to charm a super major and get them to fund the 3D seismic. Is that the next big thing?
Absolutely. And again, I mean, that is a work program. We've begun that. I can tell you, I am being phoned by people. It's not a case of me having to badger people. We are getting inbound inquiries from lots of the bigger companies wanting to talk because, they see the potential. So we have a formal farm out process that we've prepared for. We have a data room. These are processes, though, that take 6 months probably, but that's the plan. We're going to do a farm out, and again, people can look at what's been going on in Namibia since those discoveries there were made. There've been some massive farm outs done where Woodside, an Australian company, farmed into Pancontinental, another junior company. I mean, the terms of that farm out were staggering. Chevron have gone into another license there. So it's not without precedent to charm a super major when you have a really hot property,
an outstanding property.
Yeah, and that's what we have. So I mean, we're pretty confident that we'll get there. But these things take time, and you can't just charm a super major. You have to actually do the work, show them the goods, have a solid technical story that is defendable and that they will buy into, and all of that is a process.
And has that process begun? Has that timeline begun?
Yeah, well, I think we made some announcements last week where we outlined the technical summary of what's happened, and yeah, we are in the early stages of that farming. We've compiled the data room. We've got advisors on board, and that has kicked off.
Okay, what might look like a good deal to you? What would be a successful farm out process to you?
Well, I mean, the objective, one is, we'd like to see some upfront cash. 2, and, the most important thing is we need a partner who will carry us into a 3D seismic acquisition. That is not a cheap exercise. Now, because all the other licenses have been taken out recently, there are a couple of big international companies that do 3D seismic. And rather than doing it just for us, what they want to do, is very common in the industry, is do a multi-client seismic that covers a whole bunch of license areas. So the clients are not just us, but some of the neighbors, Shell, YPF, etc. Makes it a lot more efficient and a lot cheaper in the aggregate, but it does require a lot more coordination between multiple parties, etc. But the seismic vendors have already begun the process of permitting needed for this, and they're looking to be able to kick off a multi-client 3D seismic acquisition, early 2024, so early next year. So ideally, we want to be able to get into that, and to get into that, we'd need to have a farming partner done before the end of this year, and at a minimum to carry us through that program. And then if a really good farm out deal would also involve then a carry on a future well. that would be a slam dunk on my part.
Okay, so funding for a 3D cash funding for a 3D seismic and a carry on the next drilling campaign.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, and what do you need in ways of funding to get you to that nirvana situation?
What, from the company point of view? Not a lot.
Well, what does your balance sheet look like at the moment? What sort of revenues are you getting from Trinidad and so on? Is that sufficient to?
No, well, Trinidad is self-funding, but it's not producing a lot of surplus cash back to the parent.
It's not throwing off cash, no.
Not throwing off cash, but it's not bleeding. And when we inherited it from Columbus, that business was bleeding everywhere. So we fixed it. It's doing quite well, and steadily improving as we go. But it's not going to throw off a lot of cash and so on. We raised money in March of last year. At the time, we raised, I think it was $9.5 million, less fees. About a third of that money went to the settlement I'd agreed with all the previous creditors. So we had money, and we've made that money last. At the same time, we've sold a couple of non-core assets in Trinidad. One of those sales is still pending regulatory approval. But, with those incomings and the very low cost base I mentioned at the beginning, we're not by any means swimming in cash, but we are in a solid enough place that we can see our way through this farming process. In terms of what we need to get, as I said, our corner of the seismic campaign here would be somewhere in the order of $15 million. So that's why we need a major to carry us. And a well at the end of it all, I mean, these are probably $50 million wells. So again, it's not something that I have any aspiration of funding ourselves. That's something we would have a farm in for. Okay.
So, which takes us to those are my questions. I thought that was a terrific interview. Thank you, Eytan. So
no problem.
That's your work done as far as I'm concerned. What about the investors? Here we go. Bernard Garston asks, and I think these are all holders in the company. They all seem to have
yes.
They all seem to have an interest. Bernard Garston asks, how do you intend to get the share price to rise? If you do a 1-for-10 consolidation, people will sell, the price will slip back again. And there you go. He outlines the problem as he sees it. What do you say to that? What about the share price?
Well, there are actually two questions kind of jammed together there. So let me pick them apart. The first one is, how do we intend to get the share price to rise? The answer is deliver the goods. Warren Buffett is a famous saying where he says, in the short term, the market is a voting machine, and in the long term, it's a weighing machine. I can't control the share price tomorrow. It frustrates me. I mean, I am a 7% shareholder in this company now. I've written checks to get to that position. So it frustrates me just as much as it frustrates everyone else that the share price has doggedly stayed where it was. To be fair, it hasn't gone down. It's the same now as it was 12 months ago. But I can't really control the day-to-day of the market. That's up to the market to decide.
So what you're saying, though, it's painful that it's not reflecting Uruguay and its potential.
I believe it's massively undervalued at the moment, and I believe a big chunk of that valuation is because we are constantly weighed down by this, the Bahamas, which is in the past, but, so be it. But in the end, all I can do is deliver the goods. The goods here are, we picked up a license, we've done good technical work, we've added value. Now we have to do a farm out, and then we have to move forward into 3D. And, I have to believe that sooner or later, the market will weigh, not vote. And when it weighs this properly, the share price will rise. As to the second part of the question, the 10-for-1 consolidation, because of the fact that we had to issue an absolute truckload of shares over the years, including last year to recapitalize and save the company, we now have 10 billion shares or something on issue and a share price of 0.1 of a penny. It would make all the sense in the world to consolidate. It's just a purely mathematical exercise. And there are various things. I don't know if small shareholders know this, but there are a whole category of funds who invest in AIM companies who are not allowed to invest in a company with a share price less than 1 penny. So we're like off the radar for a whole bunch of potential investors. So it would make some sense to do it. At the same time, I'm acutely aware of exactly what Bernard's question has said. People will use the higher price to sell. It'll put downward pressure on the share price at a time when we don't need it. So we're not going to do it just yet. There's really no compelling reason to do it, other than it would mean we have fewer shares, and for now, a share consolidation is not really on the radar. But at some point in time, it may well make sense to do it.
Okay. We've just been discussing the fact that the Challenger has a past, and much though you're encouraging investors to focus on the future prospects, as I would myself, they do often seem to get stuck in the past. And for Challenger, it means Perseverance 1. And it's fascinating. I didn't realize that you were part of Perseverance 1. So you have got the inside track on all this, and you had the cojones to front up when you became CEO and sort out what had become a mess. So I take my hat off to you. Much respect, because you've done it the hard way. You've done it the hard way, and you're an honest man. So well done you.
I mean, I will just point out, and I've said this a few times, at the point in time when Perseverance 1 was drilled, I had shares in this company that at that point in time were worth £3 million, most of which I'd purchased. Obviously, they'd risen a bit in that. And I didn't sell a single share ever. I believed that, I was in this for what would happen if Perseverance 1 came good. And I saw that entire £3 million written off. So, now that's the deal. This is an exploration company. That's why you do these things. It's high risk, high reward.
Wow.
I'm not, and that's the deal. And if shareholders don't like that deal, then they should find a bank or a mutual fund or something else to invest in. But you come into small AIM companies like this for that risk reward profile. And believe
surely you do. Surely you do.
And
it has to be. It can't simply be a mistake.
If Perseverance,
you must know this.
If Perseverance had been the commercial discovery we had all been hoping for, firstly, I would have been a massively wealthy person today. But secondly, I would have been a hero. We would have all been heroes, And in the end, we didn't do anything wrong. We drilled the well. We drilled the well in the middle of a global pandemic. We drilled the well while we were being sued by environmental activists determined to stop it. We pulled the whole thing off without a single health and safety incident, without a single environmental incident. There were bumps along the way, and there were things that happened that meant people who'd been hoping to profit by flogging their shares in anticipation of the well maybe didn't get to take that profit. But ultimately, we drilled the well. We did what we said we were going to do, and it didn't come in. And that no one is responsible for. Rocks are rocks. They will be what they will be. And,
what was the percentage chance of success on Perseverance? Was it 30%, if I remember?
1 in 4. 1 in 4.
1 in 4. So, but, 25%.
As global exploration prospects go, that's bloody good. You go to anyone in any large international oil firm and you say, I've got a 1 in 4 well here, they will be very excited. But what you forget about is that there's still a 3 in 4 chance that it's not going to work out as you hoped. And ultimately, that's unfortunately what happened with us. But I don't feel any embarrassment or shame here talking to shareholders about it. And I get there are a lot of people who lost money, and there are a lot of people who are bitterly disappointed. I'm the same. But, it doesn't mean that you get the right to sort of hurl abuse and be angry for the next 10 years of your life, because in the end, we did what we said. It didn't work out, and now we're marching on, and we're doing the same thing again.
You've got a very good perspective there, Eytan, but I'm going to move you on. So Rachel Willis and Greg Anne, I apologize if I pronounced your surname incorrectly. They're asking more or less the same question. What's the latest with the Bahamas? Will we ever see any income from it? can we sell our data? Do we have a license interest still? Is it conceivable that we'll resurrect exploration there in the near future? There you go, the Bahamas.
Well, the last bit, the near future, I don't know. I have not given up on the Bahamas. I still believe in the prospect there. You know, we drilled one well in one location to a particular target depth that was, you know, finance constrained. There is a huge structure there. There are 3 other structures there. You know, the North Sea in England, the first exploration well drilled there wasn't the success everyone wanted. It took dozens of wells before someone finally unlocked the whole thing. So I believe there is still a lot of prospect in the Bahamas. It's difficult. The Bahamas is at the forefront of, you know, global environmentalism. You know, but we proved that it's possible to actually operate there. It's possible to drill there. It's possible to do it safely. In terms of what's the latest is shortly after finishing that well, we made an application for a renewal of our license for another 3-year exploration period. That license renewal remains in the works with the government of the Bahamas. It is incredibly frustrating that something that anywhere else in the world that should take a few hours takes years. But long-standing shareholders will remember that the gap in time between the first and second exploration period of that license was almost 6 years, 2011 till 2016. So, you know, this is a long-term game. Unfortunately, I don't have some immediate solution, but I am determined, you know, to keep this license going because I see huge prospect in it. As I've said in a few other forums, the new Prime Minister of the Bahamas has been very public in stating that he would like to adopt a slightly different approach where they and Challenger work together to come up with an alternative monetization strategy based on carbon credits. And, you know, to Rachel's point, yeah, we want to see some income sooner rather than later. And if working with the government on a carbon credit initiative is a way of achieving that, or selling data, which was the other option she mentioned, we'll look at those. And we are actively working on those in parallel with chasing the renewal of the license into a 3rd term. But the short answer is it's long term, it's going to take time. No one's given up on it yet.
Great answer. Thank you. Simon Gibbons asks, before we all get carried away with the excellent opportunity of our Uruguay assets, so at least he's looking forward. Good on you, Simon. But I know we were all disappointed in the Bahamas results. Did you garner enough information for that to be offered to a larger entity with deeper pockets? Are there any further opportunities to be explored in the Bahamas from a CEG perspective? So there you go. The same question.
I mean, the short answer is yes and yes. I mean, look, what I'd say is this: the very nature of the opportunity in the Bahamas was its scale. You know, it was so big. I mean, we often used to say the biggest undrilled structures we'd all seen, and that remains true. Thousands of square kilometers. And we really did our best over many years to define the drilling location that had the best technical risk profile. But what I said before it remains. We drilled one well in one location. If we'd had more money, we could have potentially drilled even deeper than we did. So huge potential remains. A huge amount of data was gathered from the drilling campaign and all the work we did before. And I believe that in the fullness of time, that will, you know, remain interesting to a larger oil company with much deeper pockets than we have. The next phase of activity in the Bahamas, if and when it gets there, will need much deeper pockets than we have. But you know, that's remains the plan. Ultimately, it's a huge potential basin. It needs more exploration work.
And Ranjith Powell, he says that he makes the target depth point that you just mentioned. Would it have been different if target depth had been reached? What exactly was the debris in the well bore that necessitated the sidetrack?
Well, I mean, if we drill deeper, you know, we would have been able to drill below what's called the décollement, the sort of a hard layer that sort of potentially capped even deeper structures. So yes, if we'd been able to drill deeper, maybe it would have made a difference. Who can tell? But we didn't, so we don't know. And ultimately, someone else, with us, will one day drill a deeper well or drill a well in a different location, and the outcome may be completely different. So as to the specifics on Perseverance 1, so we did see hydrocarbon charge in the structure. It just, there wasn't a sufficient pooling to represent a commercial success at that location, right? And what we have here is we have reservoirs that are carbonate, they're porous, they have lots of holes in them, but it didn't have enough permeability, in very simple term, cracks that join all the holes together to represent a commercial reservoir where we drilled, okay? But potentially that the columont that I mentioned, it might be an effective seal trapping oil deeper. And that may not even be the case elsewhere on the structures. These are such huge structures. So there is a lot of information we gathered, a lot of potential. As to the debris in the hole, because I don't know, for some reason this has captured the imagination of people, and I get asked about this all the time. When we were, that drilling campaign was a seriously complicated international grade drilling campaign. I mean, we had world-class drill ship, we had a managed pressure drilling system running, we had all these personnel and staff, and at some point during the drilling, something blocked the progress of the drill. Okay, we don't actually know exactly what it was. There are all sorts of different ideas. Maybe something fell off the drill bit, maybe something came off the managed pressure drilling system. It doesn't really matter. What happened is we're drilling, something blocked progress, and the usual thing that happens in the industry is you pull back and you sidetrack. You go out in a different direction, and then you continue drilling, and that's what we did. But I'm not 100% sure why so many people are absolutely fixated on the fact that there was debris in the hole. It was just a thing that happened.
You say
sometimes.
This is just normal. This is normal.
Well,
work as usual.
Well, it's not work as usual. You don't want it to happen because it results in a lot of delay. You have to pull back, you have to sidetrack, it adds days. And on our drilling campaign, you're spending $300,000 a day. So you don't want your rig standing still and having to deal with a sidetrack for many days. But it's not unheard of. It happens fairly frequently, and sidetracking is just a thing that people do. So it wasn't the news we all wanted when it happened. But again, the guys on the rig were really professional. We had all the world's best contractors involved, and they dealt with it. Took a bit of extra time, it added a bit of cost, but they dealt with it. And ultimately we drilled the well and we found out what we needed to find out.
Okay, Eytan, let's move on. William Chondy, apologies if I pronounce your name incorrectly, John Bamford, both ask about value destruction rather than creation. And we've been through your own personal pain, so we kind of know where you're going with this. John has been a holder for 6 years and says his 2K is now worth £8. Well, John, I will ask you, what do you think Eytan's pain feels like? He's just lost 3 million. William takes a 2-year view and asks, when will there be upward momentum? Okay, Eytan, we're all in this together, they're saying.
Yeah.
But where are the sunlit uplands? When can we expect some momentum to re-emerge?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, on the point of value destruction, I don't agree with that. I mean, a lot of value has been lost, but to say it was destroyed, as I said, we drilled a well. It was a high impact exploration well. There wasn't the oil we wanted there. There was no magic on earth that I could have done, any financial wizard could have done, that would not have seen the share price tank. That's just what happens when, and it's not, you can look at every other one of my peers who've drilled exploration wells that haven't come in, your share price drops by 90%. So there's value loss. But to sort of imply that someone destroyed value, no. The only place that people claim we destroyed value was the financing arrangements we put in place just before the drilling of Perseverance 1. I take that on the chin because, a lot of people had planned on flogging their shares in the run-up to the drilling, because it's very common that you see a share price trade up that way. The day
it ramps up before the
yeah.
drill,
Now,
in expectation of.
Yeah. Now, what had happened there was we had lined up a funding package, and 3 days before the well was due to spud, we had a bunch of environmental groups in the Bahamas take legal action with a view to stopping the drilling. And the funding package we'd lined up, 2/3 of it packed up and walked away. And we had to find $20 million of funding in 48 hours because we had a drill ship parked in the middle of the sea ready to go. And we had a court case that we were fighting in the Bahamas at the same time. So we were able to find a funding package. We put it in place. I mean, it was a mad scramble to do, but it was a package that essentially took all of that upside out of the share price in the run-up to the drilling. And there were a lot of people who were unhappy with that, and I can get why they were unhappy, but, you know, that's share trading. I was in it.
Don't look at you, look at the environmentalists, surely.
You know, and if the well had come in, everyone would have been nonetheless super happy. So as far as the part looking forward, you know, I'm doing things like this interview because I want to put the past behind. I want to have an open dialogue with shareholders, answer their questions, explain things. If they like what I have to say, hopefully they'll agree that Uruguay is an excellent, you know, prospect going forward. And sooner or later, as we deliver the goods on that prospect, there'll be some share price appreciation. There has to be. And if shareholders don't like what I have to say, if they think, oh yeah, it's all just a replay and we were there in the Bahamas, then they should sell their shares and go find somewhere else to put their money. You know, I am doing my job. Everyone in this company is 100% focused on doing, you know, the best professional work they can. You know, as I say, I've written more checks to build my shareholding in this company back up to 6 or 7%. So I'm fully aligned with all the other shareholders, and all we can do inside the company is deliver what we promise, which is, at the moment, the promise was to do the work. We've done it. The next promise is to get a farm out done and move on to 3D. If I don't deliver those things, shareholders can be as mad with me as they like. I'll deserve it, you know, but other than that, you know, all I can do is deliver. And you know, sooner or later, you have to believe that the market will agree. I would make one other observation. You know, shareholders may not notice this, but one of the things I focused very heavily on was trying to revamp our shareholder base. It's important to have small retail shareholders and liquidity. It's also important to have larger shareholders who really support what you're trying to do and are there for the long term. And over the last 12 months, we've managed to attract, firstly, a bunch of people I know from Australia, you know, literally billionaires who've made a fortune in the resource and energy industry, who really see the potential of Uruguay, and they're happy to own 5, 6, 10% of the company and just sit there and see what we can do with this. And following on from them, you know, anyone can look at our substantial shareholder list now. We've also got a few, you know, institution and sort of lower, smaller size family offices in the UK as well. So, you know, I'm pleased that we now have a good mix of shareholders, and really my job for all shareholders, as I say, is to deliver what we've promised to do. And if we do that well, you have to imagine that that the share price will see some uplift as we go.
Okay, Eytan, that's a terrific final point to make. Okay, my final question to you. It's been a very long and very involved and very interesting interview. What can Challenger shareholders look forward to over the next 12 months? In other words, what does the news flow look like? Why would now be a good time to start following the company if you're not yet a shareholder?
Well, I mean, I've outlined it as we've gone. The immediate things to look forward to, we have a bit of technical work that we're still doing as part of our work program. So in the very near term, you know, we're doing a bit more AVO analysis. We're doing formal volumetric assessments. So in the very near term, we'll be able to talk about those. Then it's our farm out process. So sometime before the end of this year, we're going to get a farm out done. And then we'd be into sort of 3D seismic and so on in 2024. The other thing, which is not strictly company news, but shareholders can look out for, is what's going on around us. 3D seismic campaigns have kicked off in northern Argentina. There's more wells being drilled every day at the moment in Namibia. So there's a lot of activity, and the outcomes of those activities have some bearing on us and our prospectivity. So there's a fairly clear and predictable news flow out through the course of the rest of this year, and I'd say now is a pretty good time to start following the company. A lot of the problems of the past are behind us. I would say the share price is as low as it's. There's not much more. There's not much lower it could go, and and all the upside ahead of us.
Okay, Eytan Uliel, CEO at Challenger Energy. Thank you so much for joining us. You've taken a long time to explain in detail and in depth what the path to a successful exploration campaign looks like for CEG. I'm sure it's really appreciated. If people take the time to listen to all this, then all the answers are there. For more free company information and data about Challenger Energy Group, please go to the CEG pages of London South East. And meanwhile, why don't you think about following us on Twitter? We've got a very active Twitter account at London South East, or at Donald Leggett even. And if you register on London South East YouTube, you can receive alerts to interviews and webinars just like this one. Thanks for watching, as always. Thank you.